Hi, guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Barbell Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Christina Lynn, and I'm here with my co-host, Marissa Roy. And in today's episode, we're going to do part 2 of our mini-series for pregnancy and fitness, nutrition and fitness during pregnancy. Hashtag my brain.
And we decided to collapse it into a 3-episode series because when we were really kind of outlining the different trimesters, the 3 different trimesters, we were like, we don't have much to say on the second trimester. Yeah. So we're just going to shove it in with the third because it's kind of not eventful, which is great. And it's a good thing. But we'll get into exactly why and probably spend the majority of the time on trimester 3.
Yes. So when I first got pregnant, I was binge listening to all of the podcasts, and I was listening to like first trimester this, first trimester that, first trimester. And I stumbled upon a podcast, and I wish I remembered it, but it was 2 women. They were sisters, and they had their OB, who was their dad, on the podcast. Yeah. So
that's strange.
Kind of strange. Or I don't know if he was their OB or if he was just a OB, like in general, which I'm sure that's probably, I know that'd be kind of weird. That's probably more likely, but anyway, so they had their dad on and they were like interviewing him, and he was kind of joking, and he was like, yeah, like if you're newly pregnant and you're trying to listen to like second trimester podcasts, he's like, you're really not going to find a lot because there's really just not anything really going on or anything that's worth talking about in like long format. So I do think it makes more sense to talk a little bit more about 2 and 3 combined.
Yeah. Were you frustrated when you were like looking for it? Like before you got into the second trimester, were you like, why is there nothing? Are they hiding something?
I think just probably like any first time mom, like you consume a lot of content because you just really want to feel prepared and kind of what to expect. But if, a lot of women are like sick and nauseous, and then when that second trimester rolls around, you're like, oh, thank God. You're just feeling a little bit better. You have more energy. And there's really just not a whole lot going along.
Nice. Yeah. Cool. Well, basically, I mean, that's kind of the summary of the second, but we'll get into like a couple details for the second trimester here. I think the real like milestone of it is number 1, this is about the time that people tend to announce their pregnancy and tell all their friends and family, and then they get lots of social support. And so there's like a big wave of probably relief too, of like, I made it past the first, I made it past the quote unquote high risk term. So that is always exciting. But then also I think the big marker here is that you will probably start to see your bump. And that's like the biggest change really that I think a lot of people have at least documented and told me about through their pregnancies as I've coached them through it, or I've seen friends go through or seen you go through, is like you just feel a lot better and you start to see a little bump.
Or if you're anything like me, you start to show your bump right away. And so you're just really big already in second trimester. I was reading like you should start to show now, and I was like,
I'm already there.
Yeah, already there. And then I should also say, I mean, if you're probably listening to this, if you're like a second, third time mom, you maybe are not listening to this because this is not your first rodeo. But if you are, just kind of remember that like with additional pregnancies, like you're probably going to start showing a little bit sooner, just because your body's already done it before. You don't need to go through it again. So your body kind of is like, I know what to do. So you will more than likely start showing earlier.
Yeah. And then I guess like it's really just starting to adjust to that. Like when it comes to workouts and when it comes to nutrition, there are some like smaller tweaks that you can make. And I think it depends on, like Christina said, if you are showing early or if you are kind of just starting to grow this bump as you're going through the second trimester, the adjustments or modifications that you might need to make in your training might be minimal to none. And then for others, it might start to really feel like a weight on your stomach, and you might need to shift your center of gravity or the types of exercises that you do. And then there's a small nutrition adjustment that you can make as well. But do you want to speak to maybe if they are the early showers in the second, this can lead us into the third as well for training, just any adjustments we would want to make there?
Yeah, so I think it just depends also like how you're feeling, right? Like are if you're feeling really good, you can continue with everything, but I know that sometimes kind of like what we talked about in the first episode is like kind of shifting your goals and your priorities with training, and so it becomes a little bit less about like performance and strength and more about functionality. And so you might feel like you have a little bit like longer of a warm up, you're trying to do a little bit more stretching, and just kind of like the other thing we talked about is hopefully you are having a little bit more energy in the second trimester. So hopefully that I've actually seen a lot of people actually feel like they get strength in the second trimester. And so they
Yeah.
want to continue kind of working out the same way. But just kind of remembering to like, you want to emphasize like core stability, pelvic floor health, and just kind of like maintaining strength. Or if you feel like you do need to go down, 75, 50% of what you're normally doing, like that is totally okay. So just kind of like adjusting the intensity and maybe even duration of your workouts. Like, if you're used to 2-hour leg days, like maybe cut that in half. But I know that the other thing too, like I had to do, is like maybe modify your stance a little bit. So when I started to show a little bit more, instead of doing regular deadlifts, like I'd have to do wide stance and kind of make a little bit more room for my belly that was coming through. So I would do things like that. And then just kind of like you were saying, like the center of gravity. So you want to be careful. Like I know that a lot of women are pregnant to like falling because they're just not as stable as they are before. So just kind of focusing on proper like modifications. And then the other thing is not only do you not want to lie flat on your back, so kind of doing things at an incline, but if you are going to like get up, I kind of recommend like rolling to your side and then pushing up rather than trying to do like a crunch. So it's like just like really small little things to do during your training sessions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think with I was going to say something on the postural adjustments and I can't remember what it was. Yeah. So you were saying like the instability might start to show up here with second trimester, particularly if you are showing early and your center of gravity starts to shift a little bit. Something that, if I will say asterisk, if you can do this safely, I would definitely just recommend training stability. And like a lot of, like you said, the shift goes from performance to functionality. So in a safe and controlled environment, doing things with a single leg movement and doing things in a way that you're actually training your glute stabilizers, your core stability, your ability to just balance and be more resilient to like trips and falls and anything that might actually hurt you. It might be a really good thing to work on probably in the first and then into the second trimester. So you can kind of like gather your bearings on like how your center of gravity does shift and how you might need to readjust with those exercises.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the other thing that we were talking about a little bit off air is there are some things that you should do for like your core. So we want to
Especially in
make
third,
sure,
right?
yeah. So like we were talking about, like we want to, like one of the reasons that we talk about like rolling to your side and kind of like sitting up. So we want to make sure that we are not putting any unnecessary pressure on our core. So that would be like, that could potentially cause diastasis recti. So something that's important is 100% of women who are pregnant will develop it. Like your body has to make room for a baby somehow. And so I think for a majority of women, I don't know the statistics off the top of my head, but by 12 weeks, your diastasis should be healed. And there are some women who might have done some more damage, I guess, during their pregnancy. Maybe they really weren't thinking about their core or even knew anything about it or how to protect it. And they do have some of that still needs kind of some rehabbing afterwards. So you don't
Oh, by 12
necessarily
postpartum, you mean?
12 weeks postpartum. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
So even if it's not present now, you want to make sure that you're not helping your body create it. So, like probably stop doing like crunches and sit-ups, especially into like the second and third trimester. Or it could just be, like push-ups or planks. Like, so wanting to like modify those exercises so you're not putting all of that pressure in like and that doesn't mean like, oh my gosh, I have to stop doing core. Like you can still do core work. Like you can do like a lot of different things, like, and that's why we recommend doing the breathing exercises, the connection breaths, diaphragmatic breathing, and things like that. You can do pelvic floor exercises, and that will help a lot with that core stability. But yeah. So
So for anyone
diastasis.
who, oh, sorry,
Sorry.
go ahead. I
No,
thought you
go
were
for
done.
it. No, go for
I
it.
was going to say for anybody who is like a little, like maybe just needs a little context here. Maybe you're still in trimester 1, you're just trying to get ahead. Think about like if you're watching this on video, then you can watch it on video. Like my two hands are right next to each other. They're really close together. And when your belly is basically growing and expanding, these muscles are just separating because literally your belly becomes a balloon, a circle. Like, so those muscles have to stretch laterally, and they're stretching typically apart from each other. So if you don't know what diastasis recti is the separation between those two like abdominal muscles that are closest together in the midsection. And I think kind of what you're saying, Christina, is that it's not whether or not you develop it in pregnancy, but it's how distinct that gap is postpartum. That is really like the risk factor, quote unquote.
Yeah, and so there are a lot of different factors that go into diastasis. So it is the separation itself, but it can also be like how deep it is, and then
Yeah.
how that connective tissue is, if it's like very loose or if it's very tight. So a lot of different things, and then you talk about 2-finger, 3-finger, 4-finger, but it also is a little bit subjective because everyone's got different hand
Size
sizes.
fingers. That's
Yeah,
for measuring the
exactly.
gap, by the way, is how
Yeah.
many fingers wide is that gap.
Yeah, so you just want to be cautious of what you're doing. And I kind of think about like erring more on the side of caution. And if you feel like you're putting too much pressure, if you're beginning to cone or anything like that, like trying to further modify the movement. So instead of doing a full push up or a full plank, like modifying, getting on your knees, like doing things at an incline, things like that. And then just seeing a pelvic floor therapist is just so helpful.
Yeah. And I mean, I think also too, just kind of explaining that when you're training, you're almost always bracing your core, or you should be. If you're not,
Mhm.
you should work on that. And so your core is always getting activation and engagement when you are strength training. And so adding additional core on top of that, thinking while your core muscles are literally separating and stretching from each other as your belly grows and expands, that's what basically when you're contracting your core muscles, you are contracting them, they're pulling themselves together when you contract. And so it's literally the opposite motion of your belly expanding and pulling them apart. And so that tension is what's creating the potential for quote unquote damage. And so I think it's like a rubber band, honestly. Like if you stretch it a good bit, like it'll keep its elasticity, but if you stretch it more and more and more and too much, then it's going to lose some of that elasticity or potentially snap, right? If you're just pulling and pulling. So it's not a perfect analogy, but it's similar enough to give you the idea of we want to apply some training to it to make it more resilient to actually recover faster and better. We don't want to just get rid of all core training, not engage our core whatsoever, and have it get weaker over the course of, I mean, honestly, 9 months is a long time to not train a muscle. However, doing a ton of sit-ups and sit-ups, crunches, the reason why that's typically very advised against is because if you just imagine these muscles are stretching horizontally apart and the sit-up and the crunch is vertically pushing down and contracting these muscles downwards and vertically upon each other. So it's just like this, I'm just imagining like the movement of the muscles being pulled apart as well as crunching down on one another. And that can also add a lot of tension. So if you're just a little maybe new to this or confused as to like, what is diastasis recti? What is coning? What is what is the separation? Why not this exercise and that exercise? A lot of the stuff is really, really common terminology in the pre and postpartum space, but I'm kind of looking at it from the lens of like, all right, if I was somebody who was like brand new to this, like I'd be like, what the heck are these two people talking about? And I just want to explain that a little bit more from like a newbie standpoint.
Yeah. Yeah. So, the other thing I want to chat about too was like, as we get into the third trimester. So again, our, oh my gosh, I'm like mom brain at its worst right now. I'm looking at Kaylee. But the goals of our training sessions, they change a little bit as well. And so we want to start doing a little bit more of labor prep. So this is really important. So we want to make sure that we are prepping our body to go through labor and delivery. So again, I don't want to get into like the nitty gritty of like how to like get your baby to move down into your pelvis and all of this. But your baby does have to fit into your pelvis in order to come out. So there are a lot of different things that you can do to kind of like prime your body. So a lot of like squat variation. So like a lot of people will just talk about doing deep squats. So like when I was at the gym, I was just like on the TRX, just hanging and just like sitting into that deep squat. So you can do just any sort of like variation, like body weight goblet squats, dumbbell, barbell, whatever you want to think about. And then any sort of deadlifts are great, glute bridges. And then the other thing that's really good too is actually doing unilateral. So if you're doing like side lunges and things like that, that can really help, as well as what we were talking about earlier, with a lot of like mobility, doing like cat cow stretches, things like that, just to help with that. So I think that will just help a lot, not only strength wise, because you do need a ton of strength going into labor and delivery, but also endurance as well.
Mm-hmm.
So making sure that you have the stamina to go through all that and to have that energy. So just kind of changing your exercises a little bit. Because again, you're not necessarily really going for pre-Rs here. It's just kind of like making sure that your body's in a prime state to deliver.
Yeah. And I think if I had to picture or give you guys an example of how might that look, like you're not just only doing TRX deep squats at the gym. Like you have a strength training session, like you're probably doing some chest press, some rows, some machines, some glute kickback, something like that. But then maybe at the end of your session or the beginning of your session, you might add in some additional stretches, some additional mobility, or you might do your squats in a wider stance, or you might go, a little bit deeper in a sumo stance back squat or something like that in your third trimester, versus the first, you might not have to modify anything or change any way that you squat, right? So it's still a normal strength training workout. You're probably modifying your intensity at this point, because we haven't necessarily talked about the third trimester energy shifts and things like that, but you're probably modifying intensity and just trying to like get by with a session versus like really pushing it and giving it your all. And then adding some of those things in so that you are feeling like you're prepping all of those areas as well. So this can honestly be a really good reason why you might want to work with a coach or a pelvic floor specialist during your pregnancy, and just finding people that know a little bit more than you. Because if you are already just in the headspace of like, I'm planning for labor and delivery, and I'm trying to also maybe still work through my entire pregnancy and manage my household and my family. Maybe you have pets and this is your first kid, and there's a lot of anxiety and fear around that. And you're trying to work out and stay healthy and stay prepared and educate yourself on birth and educate yourself on everything all at the same time. It's a lot. So sometimes it can be really beneficial to just have a professional in your corner take some of that thinking out for you. You can just follow the program as it's written, and that can make your life a lot easier. And that's not to say that that information is not online and not places for free. It absolutely is. It's just the effort and the energy of piecing it together. It is a lot. And so it's also a very niche thing. It's very different than just like a regular strength training program. And what I will say is that if you are just strength training, and you don't know anything about this, and maybe you're already past your second trimester, already past your third, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm about to go into labor. I wish I knew all this. Like, I'm regretting that I didn't do anything. Like, you're probably still better off than a lot of people from just strength training, from just staying active, from just eating healthy. But these are like, if you really want to kind of hit the whole checklist, this is the stuff that we're talking about, right?
Yeah. And I know just from my personality, like I wanted to know that I was kind of doing everything I could, because at that point, if something happened, I'd be like, well, at least I know that I took care of everything that I could with like training and nutrition and things like that, rather than be like, oh gosh, I wish I had done XYZ. That was kind of my, I guess, mindset. But yeah, when you're listing out all the different things, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm planning the baby shower and the nursery and like getting together like a list of all the things and researching car seats and this. And like there is so much to do, because if you were anything like me, I literally knew nothing. I knew nothing about babies before I got pregnant. So it's a lot. Like you feel like 9 months is a long time, but like you're in your third trimester and you're like, oh my gosh, baby's going to be here like any day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Uh,
So yeah, those are some of the training adjustments into second into third trimester. And I'll just briefly say, and I don't know if there's much more that you have to add on this. If you haven't listened to the first trimester episode, I would, even if you're in the second or the third, because we cover a lot of like great nutrients that you should be eating and different vitamin and mineral requirements. So like go listen to that for all the recaps on things that should be through the whole pregnancy. We kind of set the foundation for that in the first part, but a lot of times, again, your belly showing, you're eating for two myth kind of continues to persist through pregnancy as a whole. But really, the nutrition intake needs are in the second trimester increasing your intake by 200 to 300 calories and 400 to 500 calories in the third. And then I think the only other thing I'll add is that as your belly grows through these second and third trimesters, what I know is that it gets very hard to eat large portions of food at a time, because there's literally a child like bumping up against your rib cage and like your stomach is squished into a corner, is what I basically have heard. And people have described to me how that feels. So it's like smaller meals more frequently throughout the day, and just trying to still hit your caloric needs through those barriers, but just a different style of eating that you just want to adjust to. But
yeah. So we discussed in the first episode that you really don't need to increase your calorie intake. You gave a really funny story about your friend. But that's the myth. And so when you enter into your second trimester, you're really only looking at an additional 300 to 350 extra calories.
oh,
And
okay,
it's
so it's a little bit
really,
more.
yeah, so it's really not a whole heck of a lot. That could just be like a snack of like apples and peanut butter, or like a little smoothie, or it's really not a whole heck of a lot. And then in the third trimester, from the increase that we've already made, you only need an additional 150 to 200 calories from the second trimester. So, also keep in mind that this varies very differently if you have multiples. So this is only if you have one fetus.
Is it a lot more with twins?
I don't know how much more, but yes, it is, because I've never had twins or had clients with twins. But yeah, so really, it's not really that much extra.
Yeah.
From the entirety. I mean, if you're really only looking at max 550 extra calories, so just kind of like one larger meal.
Yeah. But that could be, I mean, it could still be hard to adjust to, especially with, again, we kind of covered this in the first, but like having good nutrition foundations going into a pregnancy does make this a lot easier. But eating a whole nother meal when you maybe don't have the space in your stomach can be tough. So a lot of times this is a time period, and it's kind of similar to like when we talk about going into a lean gaining phase or growth phase or eating in a calorie surplus. Some of the shifts that might be really necessary for you are shopping for things that are the not reduced calorie, low fat, low carb version of things, just to make it easier to get the calories in, and not shying away from things that would normally be considered maybe hard to fit in someone's macros for fat loss, but are delicious and healthy. Like, for example, granola, avocados, nuts, seeds. Like, these are things that are very calorically dense. We typically in the diet world tend to avoid them because they're high in calories per
or full
unit.
fat dairy. That was
full fat dairy.
That was a hard one for me.
Yogurt, milk,
Mm-hmm.
cheeses, etc. So switching from egg whites to whole eggs, you mentioned that one on the first one. So things like that, but they can make a huge difference in your ability to not feel like you're just stuffing yourself and being miserable trying to eat what you need to be eating. If you've just never been the person to eat a lot, which just happens to be like most of the clients that we work with, I feel like it's like increasing calories is actually a chore. It's actually hard. So on top of what our normal maintenance is, adding that extra 500 might feel like a lot with all the normal barriers that you're facing with pregnancy. So something to keep in mind, like you might need to treat it a little bit like a mentality where you're taking off some of those guardrails, but still obviously managing portions and all of that, keeping it nutrient dense.
Yeah. And it's funny when we talk about like doing like a lean bulk, I've seen a lot of bodybuilding coaches love sometimes when their clients get pregnant because it almost forces those clients who don't want to bulk or don't want to eat more to raise their intake.
And feel their relationship with food too.
Yeah, exactly. So it can be really, really beneficial. Not just for baby, but also for you to make those switches and to kind of almost give yourself permission to eat those foods that you wouldn't normally eat. So one of the books that I really like, and I forget, I think it's Real Foods for Pregnancy. So it is by what's her name? Lily Nichols. So she does a really, really good book. And I think that you would really appreciate it, Marissa, because it's very science-based. And so originally she wrote a book for gestational diabetes because there was a lot of misconceptions out there, especially in the literature. And everyone loved it so much that they were like, just write one for like normal pregnancy. So she did. And it's really, really good. And it debunks a lot of, like, it's just funny to read that. And then I got a book when I first got pregnant, like that here, my OB office just gave to me. And just reading that after just reading her book, I was like, oh my gosh, like it was almost hard to like get through. But I wanted to read it because I was like, this is what is being handed out at doctor's offices. And this is, if you don't know that this book or like any other resources exist, like this is the information that you're getting. So,
wow.
But yeah,
was it a lot of conflicting information?
Yeah, like talking about like protein, like requirements and things like that, or like what you should be eating. It was just hard to read. So I really liked that book. I actually used Amazon. What's their Kindle? Like, or whatever their read aloud was. So Audible? I really like, yes, Audible, Kindle. I don't know, whatever. Yeah, no, that thing. I know. Haven't eaten very much, ironically, after we're talking about all this.
As we're talking about this.
Yeah, but yeah, so Audible, not Kindle, Audible. And really good. So if you know someone who's pregnant, this is a really good book to get for them.
Nice. Okay. And then I think the big piece we're missing here is trimester 3 mentality, energy adjustments as you get into, because we covered training pretty much with the training modifications, the nutrition, caloric intake, but like, how are you going to feel in your third trimester?
Yeah. So again, trimester 2 comes around and you're like, oh man, I feel great again. And then
I could do this for a long time.
Yeah. And then third trimester comes and you're like, oh my gosh, I thought my belly was big. It's even bigger.
Yeah.
That fatigue usually comes back a little bit again. So you might be like wanting to nap, but it's also hard because you feel like it's crunch time and you've only got a few months left. But again, just kind of continuing to build off the foundations from first and second trimester that we want to continue to focus on, like nutrient dense foods. We're continuing to have those additional calories. But the other thing that sometimes happens is like you start to have like heartburn and indigestion. You start to have some swelling. So I know that that can kind of play into like body image as well. And that's actually something that we didn't really talk about that's really important is like weight gain during pregnancy. I know that that's usually a really, really big concern for a lot of women is they start to freak out and thinking about like, oh my gosh, especially because, and it's outdated, right? Like your OB will take your height and your weight and they give you your BMI, and based off your BMI, they give you a weight range. So if you have a normal healthy BMI, they typically tell you don't gain more than 25 to 35 pounds. It's a very blanket statement because again, it's not really taking into consideration a lot of things, but I know that that can be really hard for a lot of people to hear that. And then if they are in their third trimester and they're like, I've already gained 30 pounds or I've already gained 35. So one of the things that I like to tell women is your rate of weight gain can vary. Like some people don't gain any in their first trimester and then they really kind of take off in their second, third. Some gain a lot in their first, second, and then they taper off in their third. So it really just depends. And a lot of different things can factor into that, like what you're able to eat, like how sick you are, like what your hydration levels. If you have, like for me in my first pregnancy, I had a lot of excess amniotic fluid. So I had a ton of swelling. My belly was humongous and I gained a lot of water weight. So it can feel really hard, but kind of like we were talking about before, if you are doing your best with nutrition, you're doing your best with exercise, whether that is modified, but you're still doing what you can. And if you gain 40 to 45 pounds, but you're still having like a healthy pregnancy, like I think that's okay. So like my OB said, I think I was at 40 pounds. And she was like, yeah, like technically you have maternal, like your high maternal weight gain. And she goes, and again, like, she's like, you look healthy. Granted, she has no idea what I'm doing because she's not asked. She hasn't asked. She's like, I gained 75 pounds. She's like, you're fine.
Damn.
Yeah. And she looked great. She looked fantastic. Yeah. So I think that, just like, don't compare yourself to your friend or your favorite influencer. If you start freaking out. And so I also feel like I have to put a little asterisk and say that if you do have, unusually high weight gain, that's like very sudden, that could be signs of like preeclampsia or some other things. So to let your OB know, but that the weight gain during pregnancy is not always linear, that it can change. It can go up and down. You can maintain for a couple weeks and then have a huge jump. It really just depends. But there are a lot of different things. So I actually have, it's probably one of my best performing posts on my Instagram, but I have it pinned to the top of my page, just kind of like where you gain your weight
Is that
from.
that like diagram that you made with your body in the middle?
Yeah, which is actually, I took a picture and I sent it to my husband. Just like, it was actually when we were going out to dinner and we met you. I forget where we were. Were we in Phoenix?
I remember that.
Right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so I sent that to my husband, not thinking that I would like use it in a social media post. My arm is like cut off. But it's just showing you like where your weight comes from, because a lot of women think, oh my gosh, it's just my baby. And then whatever else is just fat. But your baby, on average is about 7.5 pounds. Your placenta is about 1.5 pounds. Amniotic fluid can be about 2 pounds. Your uterus enlarges, that can be 2 pounds. Your breast tissue, your blood volume, 2 pounds, 4 pounds. And then like your fat stores. So yes, you are storing fat, but it's for a purpose because your body wants to make sure that it has energy for breastfeeding. So that was very, very helpful information for me when I was pregnant, because it was like, oh, okay, like it's not
It's not
just
all just
me.
body fat.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. A lot of it was like, or not a lot, but some of it
Yeah.
was, but it's all for a purpose.
Right.
So that really helped a lot for me. So, I think that it's good to talk about in this episode, but, that can really help, just mentally with the body image, because
Yeah.
especially in your third trimester, you're like, oh my gosh, I am, I am huge.
Yeah. That's what I
So
was
the
gonna say
other,
is the quote that I hear the most in third trimester is either "I feel humongous" or "Get this baby out of me."
yes, yeah, yeah, because, during the second and third trimesters, like the weight, or the again, the rate of change in which your baby is growing is very rapid. You're like, oh my gosh, I remember my baby was the size of a lemon and now it's the size of a pumpkin or a watermelon. So your baby does have to grow. So you are going to get a little bit bigger. But that helped a lot. And then again, it's so silly, but like not comparing your bump or your body composition to someone else, because how tall you are, like how long or short your torso is, all of those things can contribute to your belly size. And I joke because, one of my coaches, just gave birth, and she's 5'7", and she's very tall. And she didn't really look like she had much of a belly even in her third trimester. But for me, like, I'm really short. Like, I got a short torso, and like there's really not a whole lot like upwards of my baby to go. So my baby goes out, and I just have a big belly, and it is what it is. And if I compared myself to other people, like that would really, really hurt my body image. Um, so if you are someone that just maybe needs to like stay off social media during your pregnancy to just kind of like protect your peace, like I'd highly recommend that.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like if I had to really think about which pregnancies go viral on Instagram, like what are you going to see the most of? You're going to see the most of the biggest and the smallest stomachs, because the smallest is going to be the quote unquote ideal of like, oh my God, you don't even look like you're showing. And it's like
Yeah.
this anomaly that like barely ever happens, but that's going to go viral because people are going to envy it. And then the opposite is going to happen where the like biggest stomachs online when you're pregnant from like twins or triplets or just like really, really big tummies with like like you said, the anatomy where it just goes out is going to go super viral too, because people are like, whoa, you're so big, like that sort of thing. So, there's really probably just so much in between that like it's not even reality that you're really tuning into. And you probably know this better than me because my feed is not pregnancy at all, because that's not the stage of life that I'm in yet. But for you, I know that it's a big part of who you work with, your whole feed, like your stage of life. So you probably see a lot more of those like extremes versus just random people in the middle, right?
Yeah. And so I think that that's something that's really important to touch on, and that I've done in, another post. Is kind of like what a fit pregnancy is and what it
Mm.
isn't, because there's a lot of, and again, like I'm very immersed in this, but there's like the hashtag like baby or like, belly only pregnancy. And I just think that that is like we just talked about, like it's physically not possible for you to have a belly only pregnancy.
What does that mean?
It means that you only grow in your belly. Like you
Mm.
don't gain fat anywhere else. Like nothing else happens
Just
on
like
your body.
totally normal, just
Just
above.
belly. Yeah, you just have this like basketball in your belly. And
Nice.
there are literally like influencers who look like that. Like,
Yeah.
and they are the anomaly. But again, like what we just talked about with your weight gain, like it is literally physically not possible to have a belly only pregnancy, because you're going to increase your blood volume. That doesn't only happen in your belly. Like you're going to store breast tissue, like all of these things. So it's just physically not possible. So like I always say that like to my clients, like a fit pregnancy is not just based on how you look. It's not based on gaining the least amount of weight possible. It's not based on a specific day, at least amount of days that you're working out. And it's not about only eating clean or only eating whole foods or all. It's like, it's just about staying healthy for you and your baby. and kind of reaping those benefits of exercise. And it's because, again, it's one of the best things that you can do for both you and baby. And it's about like, okay, filling your body with whole nutritious foods, but also practicing balance and moderation, because we know that when you're pregnant, like you get some weird cravings going on. And it's just about gaining the healthiest amount of weight for both you and baby. And I've given this, I might have talked about this before, but I had a friend who was like, her first pregnancy, she, I think she like, did like absolutely nothing, like ate like crap, like didn't work out, did nothing. She gained like 45 pounds. Second pregnancy, she was, really intense about it. She's like, I don't want to gain that weight again. So she was working out, she was doing CrossFit, she was tracking her macros. She gained 40 to 45 pounds. And then her third pregnancy, she did a combination of both. She took it easy. She also worked out. She gained 40 to 45 pounds. So sometimes it's like, it doesn't really matter what you do. Your body's just going to do what it needs to do to have a healthy pregnancy and deliver a baby. So while we're talking about what you should do with nutrition and training, it doesn't always necessarily mean that you can control every aspect of your body and what it needs to do to have a healthy baby in pregnancy.
Yeah. I think mindset wise, one of the biggest things that can bring people a lot of peace is just trusting their body and trusting that it knows what it needs to do. Like, we're literally built for this. Like, literally we were put on this earth to make babies. Like, that is why we are female and we have a uterus. So like, just trust that that is a purpose that your body has been made to fulfill, and that it knows what it's doing, and that like nature will kick in, and you just want to do everything that you can within your control to, like, honestly, a big part of it's giving yourself that peace of mind when you're like putting in the action, but also just promoting healthy behaviors as a whole. But I think the more you can kind of loosen your grip on controlling the outcome, because literally there's not as much as you think, I think, in this process, and really just trying to do your best, it can relieve a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, and probably make it easier on you overall. Because I think the only way that it goes south is if you're so stressed about it that your physiology follows your psychology. So just finding that peace in the fact that like your body's going to do what it's going to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's just about like embracing kind of that unknown. And, it's like, it's ironic, but it's like trusting the process.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, again, it's just kind of adjusting your goals and expectations, and kind of like what we were talking about with that fake pregnancy. If you need to prioritize rest and recovery, if you need more sleep, oh, that's something that I think we talked about. Like, I was used to getting up at like 5 a.m. Like, and I was doing this when I was postpartum, when I was getting up with Colton. But when I got pregnant, I was sleeping in, and I was so tired. And I was telling my husband, I was like, I don't know why I can't get up. He's like, I don't know. Like, what could it be? But just knowing that that's okay, and like trying to find that balancing act between like activity and rest. And I will say, one of the best things that you can do is, if you're like, I have no energy for workouts, you guys are talking about like squatting and deadlifting, and it's like, if you just want to walk, it's one of the best things that you can do. So I talked about this previously in a reel, and talking about my experience with my first pregnancy and how I was kind of scared to work out. Like, I wish I had just kind of shifted from what I thought I needed to do to like just moving my body in a way that felt good, whether that was just switching to prenatal yoga, or just doing stretching, or I was walking, but maybe walking a little bit more, doing some things that just feel good for you, and just like having that peace of mind. Like, I am being active, I'm doing something. It may not be what I'm used to doing or what I technically, quote unquote, should be doing, but just having that peace of mind, I feel like, makes things a little bit easier on you.
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad you touched on the sleep part, because that almost forgot about it.
Yeah. Again, because your body is doing a lot. It's like, I think I've heard it's like the easiest, hardest thing that you've ever done, because like you don't have to think about, be like, oh crap, I forgot toenails, or like, oh shoot, I need to. It's like, you don't have to.
Can you imagine if it was an active process? Like,
oh
all
my
right,
God.
let me select the eyelashes.
Yeah, and you're like, oh dang, I forgot fingers. but yeah, I mean, it's like the easiest, hardest thing that you've ever done, because it's, yeah, a lot of it is not an active, conscious thing, but it does take a toll on your body. So, just kind of preparing and listening to your body, I think that's really, really important. And so, like, adapting your routine if necessary, just in kind of like auto regulating. That's what we talked about. And you can just auto regulate every day. And some days you got really good days, and some days you just might need to take it easy, and that's okay. So, I think that pregnancy is such a good insight into what parenting is going to be like, right? Which is being like consistent, but being adaptable, being flexible, having uh, expectations, but being okay if they don't always go 100% according to plan. And just kind of like, I think the other thing we talked about this was being positive and being like grateful for everything that your body is doing, rather than thinking about all the negatives and what you can or can't do.
Yeah.
Or what you can't do. I think that makes a really big difference. And I've seen, like we were talking about, like you have less symptoms when you're having that mindset,
Yeah.
and just kind of like embracing the journey. I
Yeah.
think that that's really important.
Yeah. I have not gone through it, but I am a firm believer that you create more of what you focus on no matter what the situation is. So I stand by that 100%.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think that's it.
I got nothing.
Yeah. Awesome, guys. Well, it is a little bit of a longer episode, but only because I think that we condensed the two. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed, and stay tuned for part 3, which is going to be 4th trimester, which is the postpartum time period. So I'm really excited to touch on that. It's going to be a really good one. So if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. You can find both of us on Instagram. You can find me at Christina Fit. Marissa is at Marissa Roy Fitness. Thank you guys so much for listening, and hope to see you back next week.